No one in the village could have imagined that this grieving man was a ruthless murderer who had killed his own wife and coldly buried her body. But no matter how well a dark secret is hidden, one day it must face the light. What punishment would be the most fitting for the murderer? And will the vengeful and wronged soul ever forgive the unfaithful husband? Once upon a time, in a village called Ekon, there lived a man named Jabari. He had a wife named Aba, a gentle and kind-hearted woman who was loved by everyone in the village. But one night, a tragedy struck. Aba disappeared without a trace. The villagers searched everywhere, deep into the forests, under the ancient trees, and through the thick bushes. They called out Aba's name repeatedly, but she never returned. Everyone was extremely worried, and after many days of fruitless searching, they began to believe that something terrible had happened to Aba, and that she was gone for good. They were filled with sorrow and missed her dearly. They spoke of her sweet smile, her gentle nature, and her kindness. They said they would always cherish the beautiful memories they had of Aba. But no one knew that Jabari was hiding a dark secret. He knew exactly where Aba was. In fact, she hadn't disappeared as everyone believed. Jabari continued to show sorrow and grief in front of the villagers, but deep inside, he was contemplating marrying Aba's close friend. He kept this secret from everyone, even from his closest confidants. Every night, as he gazed up at the stars, fear crept into his heart, for he knew the truth about where Aba really was. Jabari tried to live as if everything were normal. He smiled and chatted with the villagers and worked diligently in the fields, but deep down, he was consumed by fear and sadness. When he was alone, he would hear whispers in the wind, as if it were Aba's voice. Sometimes, in the dead of night, he dreamt of Aba returning with a sorrowful expression, asking why he had done such a thing. Although Jabari wanted to move on and pursue a new marriage, the memory of what he had done to Aba under the red apple tree that night continued to haunt him. As he walked through the backyard, he noticed that the ground felt different, heavier somehow. Jabari thought that perhaps he should make new plans to ease the burden on his heart, but the dark secret of what he had done to Aba only made his heart grow heavier. Strange things began happening in the village at night. The wind howled louder than usual, and sometimes the door of Jabari's house would slam shut, even when there was no breeze. The red apple tree, under which Jabari and Aba once sat, started dropping its ripe fruits prematurely, falling to the ground in an eerie manner. The villagers began whispering to each other, saying that it might be Aba's restless spirit, unable to find peace. They murmured about how a soul might return if it still harbored unresolved grievances, but Jabari refused to believe such things. He laughed loudly, dismissing it all as just the wind and an old apple tree. He tried to ignore the chills that ran down his spine whenever he was home alone, convincing himself that it was all just superstition. Instead of worrying about these strange occurrences, Jabari turned his attention to Muna, Aba's close friend. Muna was gentle and kind, with a smile that reminded him a little of Aba. He began visiting Muna's house more often, engaging her in conversations, showing her care and attention, trying his best to win her heart. But each time Jabari spoke with Muna, a gust of wind would sweep through, rustling the leaves and making the curtains dance. At night, the strange sounds around Jabari's house grew louder, as if someone were whispering his name, and they became increasingly forceful, as if they were trying to convey something urgent to him. Despite all this, Jabari chose to ignore it, focusing instead on Muna's sweet smiles and gentle words. But deep down, his fear was growing. He dreaded the possibility that the villagers' whispers might be true, that Aba's spirit was indeed present, seeking justice for herself. On a beautiful morning, as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the leaves, Jabari decided it was time to propose to Muna, a decision that could turn out to be the biggest mistake of his life. He wore a beautiful shirt, adorned with intricate and elegant patterns that exuded sophistication. along with the engagement ring sparkling with a diamond as radiant as a tiny star, awaiting a sweet acceptance. Jabari's heart now fluttered with excitement and hope for a new love story. Muna was gardening when Jabari arrived, her hands tending to the beautiful flowers, and her face lit up with a warm smile as he approached. But when he brought up the topic of marriage, her smile suddenly faded, and she paused, her eyes glancing around as if searching for the right words to say. The wind carried her whispered words. "I love Aba very much. She's like a sister to me. Are we moving too fast? The pain of losing Aba is still there." Jabari nodded, trying to hide the worry in his eyes. "I understand, Muna, but life must go on, and we have to find happiness wherever we can," he said, his voice almost persuasive. As they spoke, a cold breeze swept through the garden, sending chills down their spines despite the sunny weather. Muna shivered and glanced around, a sense of unease rising within her. The flowers in her garden swayed violently, as if protesting against this decision. "Do you feel that, Jabari?" Muna whispered, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. "It's just a cold morning breeze, Muna," Jabari replied quickly, wanting to hold her close to reassure her. But then, something strange happened. A beautiful flower from Aba's favorite bush suddenly withered and died right before their eyes. Muna pushed Jabari away, her face filled with dread, her heart racing. "Jabari, I need time to think about this. Please," she stammered, the deep bond she shared with Aba now tangling her emotions more than ever, making it difficult to unravel them. Jabari left Muna's house with a heavy heart. As he made his way home, the air grew heavier, and the voice of Aba whispered incessantly in his mind, like a tormented spirit seeking release. That night, as Jabari struggled to sleep, the image of the withered flower haunted him. The house groaned and howled as if burdened by the presence of an invisible entity, and Jabari tossed and turned, his mind consumed by regret and fear. It seemed the harder he tried to move forward, the more the past clung to him, reminding him of the secrets buried just beyond his window. With the dark secret of what he had done weighing heavily on him and the guilt growing unbearable, Jabari couldn't find peace in sleep for many nights. Finally, unable to endure the strange occurrences and the crushing remorse any longer, he made his way to the forest, where a wise old woman lived in a small hut surrounded by peculiar herbs. The villagers said she could speak to spirits and uncover hidden truths. As Jabari approached, the old woman was sitting outside her home, eyes closed as if listening to the wind. Without opening her eyes, she said, "I've been expecting you, Jabari." A shiver ran down his spine as he sat down across from her, the ground beneath him cold. "I need your help," he began, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Strange things are happening around my house. I hear whispers, and things move on their own." The old woman opened her eyes, her gaze piercing straight into Jabari's, as if she could see through all his secrets and thoughts. "There is a young girl's spirit lingering around you," she spoke slowly. "It is a spirit filled with injustice and hatred, and it is seeking release." Jabari's heart pounded harder, fear mingling with despair. "What must I do to stop it? How can I bring peace back to my home?" he asked, hoping for a simple solution. The woman sighed, her voice heavy with the weight of her knowledge. "The only way to calm the spirits is to confess your sins. The truth must be revealed to heal the wounds you have caused." Jabari gasped, disbelief gripping him. "Confess? I can't reveal what I did to Aba. The consequences would be unimaginable. I would lose everything, my respect, my place in the village, and maybe even my freedom." He shook his head in denial, his voice filled with desperation. "No, there must be another way. Can't you perform a ritual or give me a charm?" he pleaded. The woman shook her head, her expression contemplative. "There are some things we must be honest about to feel light and freed. Your soul is bound to a secret so dark and cruel. Unless you free yourself from it, No charm or spell can bring you peace, and that spirit will haunt you for the rest of your life." Jabari suddenly stood up, his chair scraping against the ground. "No, I can't," he muttered, his voice trembling with anxiety. As he turned to leave, the woman added, "Beware, Jabari. Secrets buried in the shadows will one day come to light. It is better that you be the one to reveal them, or the consequences will be beyond your imagination." Jabari walked towards the village, the old woman's words echoing in his mind with every step, making his fear grow stronger. He constantly felt as if Aba's spirit was watching him, her gaze filled with sadness, reproach, and hatred. That night, as the wind howled through the house and darkness seemed to envelop everything, Jabari knew the old woman had been right, but he still couldn't bring himself to confess what he had done. He jumped out of bed in extreme tension, gazing at the moonlight streaming through the window, feeling the weight of his secret like a massive boulder. Haunting images constantly flashed through his mind, and he wondered how long he could endure this haunted existence. Despite the old woman's warning and countless sleepless nights plagued with nightmares, Jabari decided to go ahead with his plan to marry Muna. He thought that maybe marrying Muna would calm the chaos weighing on his mind. Jabari began preparing for the wedding, hoping that it would distract him from the strange occurrences around his home. The village buzzed with excitement about the upcoming wedding. Tents were being set up, and colorful fabrics were being hung. The villagers were cheerful and eager to help decorate for the wedding, creating a joyful, festive atmosphere. Yet deep inside, Jabari's heart remained heavy. As everything seemed to be progressing, the strange occurrences grew more intense. One evening, as Jabari was discussing the wedding feast with Muna in his living room, the house suddenly grew cold, and a gust of wind blew through, extinguishing the lamps, plunging the room into darkness. And there, by the window, a shadowy figure appeared, its silhouette unmistakably resembling Aba. Her gaze, a mix of sorrow and anger, sent a chill down Muna's spine. As Jabari blinked, the figure vanished, but Muna had seen it too. Was that Aba?" Muna whispered, her voice trembling with fear. "It's just the darkness, there's nothing there," Jabari replied hastily, his voice shaky. But Muna couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She began asking more questions. "Jabari, tell me the truth. What really happened to Aba? People say she just disappeared, but now I'm not sure if that's true, or if there's something more. Some secret." Jabari felt trapped, the dark and cruel secret within him burning in his chest. He avoided Muna's gaze, stumbling over his words, and replied angrily, "Aba is gone, Muna. She just left one night and disappeared. I don't know where she went." But with all the strange occurrences, Jabari's words felt hollow, and Muna sensed that something was amiss. Her sleep was haunted by dreams of Aba, calling out to her, begging to be found. The more she pressed Jabari for answers, the more he evaded her, and Muna's suspicions grew stronger. As the wedding day drew near, the supernatural occurrences became more intense. The mirror that Aba used for makeup suddenly cracked, and the wind chimes swayed violently as if touched by an unseen force, even though there was no wind. Every night, the villagers could hear the sorrowful singing of a girl echoing throughout the village. The people began to whisper anxiously, their excitement about the wedding turning into concern. "Could this be a bad omen from Aba for the upcoming wedding?" they murmured. One afternoon, as Muna was arranging flowers at the wedding venue, she saw Aba's reflection in a mirror. Aba's image appeared with a sorrowful expression, but her eyes were filled with hatred. She moved as if trying to communicate with Muna. Overwhelmed with fear and horror, Muna noticed a wilted flower in the garden, the very flower that Aba loved the most. Despite her fear, Muna felt as though it was a message from Aba. She confronted Jabari once again, this time with more determination. "I saw her, Jabari. Aba was in the mirror, and she looked so sad, her eyes full of anguish and hatred. Please, for the sake of the tormented and wronged souls, tell me what happened to her." Jabari, seeing the fear and resolve in Muna's eyes, knew he could no longer hide the truth. The guilt, The haunting spirits and Muna's persistence were too much for him to bear. He felt the weight of his actions pressing down on him, suffocating him under the large red apple tree where he had once shared so many happy moments with Aba. Finally, Jabari broke down, tears streaming down his face as he confessed everything to Muna. The truth was revealed. He told her about his affair with a woman from the neighboring village and how Aba had discovered their secret relationship. He recounted to Muna the argument that followed. It was on a clear, moonlit night, and Aba, with a face full of anger and hurt, had confronted Jabari, saying, "Weren't we happy? Why did you cheat on me?" Her eyes were filled with betrayal and pain. Jabari looked at Aba and said coldly, "No, Aba, I no longer feel love for you. I want to marry her. There's something about her that makes her so special to me. I want her to be my wife, not you." His gaze at that moment was so callous that it was terrifying. "No, Jabari," Aba cried out in agony and rage. "You can't do this! We are husband and wife. We promised to be together forever, and we swore never to betray each other in front of the village elders. If you do this, the villagers will gossip and look down on us." Jabari, infuriated, shouted, "No, Aba! I will do whatever I want!" In her grief, pain, and disappointment, Aba ran out of the house. And because he didn't want his shameful secret affair to be exposed, and he wanted to marry that woman without facing the scorn of the villagers, in that fleeting moment, Jabari made an incredibly ruthless decision. He rushed after Aba, stopped her, and murdered his own wife to bury the secret forever. Then, Jabari took Aba's body back and buried her beneath the apple tree, the very spot where he and Aba used to sit and share their deepest thoughts. This tree, which had witnessed so many beautiful memories between them, now bore witness to a horrifying and cruel act. Muna listened to Jabari's confession, horrified and heartbroken. The world seemed to spin around her as she grappled with the terrifying truth about the man she was about to marry. As the truth unraveled, all the bright possibilities of her future turned dark before her eyes. What was once a joyful occasion, with wedding preparations filling the days, now sank into the depths of a tragic reality. With tears streaming and her heart shattered by the fate of her best friend, she stumbled away from Jabari, her mind now consumed with shock and doubt. Jabari could only watch helplessly as Muna walked away. The weight of his guilt grew heavier than ever as he recalled his cruel actions towards his wife, all driven by a moment of selfish desire. The torment and internal struggle, escape or face the consequences. Jabari knew that once Muna told the villagers what he had done, his life in the village would be over. He would be shunned, despised, and possibly punished by the law. Sitting alone, Jabari wrestled with the terrible things he had done. The thought of fleeing the village crossed his mind. He could leave in the dead of night, find a new land, and start over, a place where no one knew about his dark and cruel secret. But as he began packing a few belongings, Jabari realized the futility of this idea. He was too deeply entangled in his lies, and he knew that the truth would always remain the truth, haunting him no matter where he went. Every creak of the house, every whisper of the wind seemed like an accusation, reminding him of the grave beneath the red apple tree. Jabari felt desperation creeping in, pushing him to the brink. Panic welled up within him as he stopped packing and thought about facing the wrath of the villagers. His mind swirled with thoughts. Could he endure their judgment, their contempt? He imagined their furious faces, the way they would look at him, not as a person, but as a monster, a murderer. The decision to face the truth, no matter how dark, once the truth is brought to light, there is no way to bury it again. Jabari sat in his dimly lit house, his mind filled with imagined sounds, mocking laughter, reproachful voices, sorrowful cries. His spirit was weighed down with fear, heavier than ever before, as if he were being tortured by the cruelty of his own deeds. He realized that the best thing he could do now was to confront the truth. This thought terrified him, yet a strange sense of relief washed over him. Soon, the burden of Jabari's cruel secret would be lifted, for better or worse. With a heavy heart, Jabari stayed awake through the night, waiting for the dawn and the inevitable confrontation that lay ahead. He knew that the following day could change his life forever, and he braced himself for the judgment of the villagers, for the terrible consequences of his unforgivable actions. As the hours passed, he prepared mentally for what was to come, knowing that once the truth was out, there would be no turning back. The truth unveiled, the journey to seek justice. As the dawn bathed the sky in hues of gold and orange, Muna, after a sleepless night filled with torment and anger, gathered all her courage and made her way to the village center, determined to expose the truth and seek justice for her friend. She gathered the villagers around the ancient banyan tree, where important meetings and decisions were often held. Her voice trembled as she recounted the horrific confession Jabari had made. Her words were laden with indignation and fury at Jabari's cruel actions, but also immense sorrow for what had happened to Aba. The villagers listened, and their previous skepticism slowly turned into shocking realization, followed by intense rage as Muna spoke of the garden behind Jabari's house, of the red apple tree where Aba might have been buried. Murmurs rose from the crowd, escalating into angry shouts and calls for justice. Led by the village elder, a respected figure, the villagers marched towards Jabari's home, their faces full of fury and indignation. Jabari watched from his doorway, his face pale, knowing the time had come for him to face the truth. His fearful eyes met Muna's accusatory gaze as the villagers began digging in the red apple orchard behind the house. Not long after, beneath the largest, most fruit-laden apple tree in the garden, a shovel struck something, and the villagers crowded closer, digging deeper. One of them screamed in horror, "There's a skeleton here!" Clearing away the mud, Aba's remains slowly emerged. Her tattered clothes, though worn, were still recognizable, and her skeletal remains were a heartbreaking testament to her tragic fate. The village elder stepped forward, his face contemplative as he addressed the crowd. "This is truly a dark day for us." His voice echoed with a sorrowful tone, yet still carried an air of authority. "Poor Aba was brutally murdered. We cannot let her soul wander in injustice and pain. Justice must be served for her and for us." The villagers nodded, their faces filled with anger, chanting, "Yes, justice must be served. The culprit must be punished." Immediately afterward, Jabari was escorted to the village's detention area, guarded by the village youths, while the elder and the village council began deliberating to deliver a fitting judgment for Jabari and to seek justice for Aba. Meanwhile, the villagers were also performing rituals to soothe Aba's spirit, asking for her forgiveness and hoping that peace would return to the village. Incense was burned, prayers were recited, and offerings were presented, all as part of a solemn promise to Aba that justice would be served, and with the hope that her suffering would ease and she would be freed from the darkness. Confession and the plea for forgiveness. As the sun gradually sank beyond the horizon and the night descended, after consulting with the village council, the elder, dressed in his ceremonial attire, proceeded to the temple where important events were often held. The villagers had already gathered there, filling the space with an air of solemnity. At the center, Jabari was brought forward, facing the judgmental and angry gazes of the community. His face had become gaunt, the traces of guilt deeply etched into his anxious and tense eyes. The elder stood before the people and began to speak. "Today we gather here not only to seek justice for Aba, but also to restore peace to our community and to bring comfort to the wounded soul of Aba. Let the truth be spoken here, and let the wrongdoer be held accountable for what he has done." His voice resonated with authority. Turning to face Jabari the elder, with a stern and commanding tone, continued, "Speak the truth, confess your cruel actions, and seek forgiveness from Aba's spirit and from this community." Jabari, with eyes filled with tension and anxiety, began to confess in a shaky voice, I hurt Aba, my wife, the woman I had vowed to protect and love. In a moment of selfishness, I took her life because she stood in the way of my desires. I buried her in the backyard of our home, trying to hide my crime from everyone. The villagers listened, their faces a mixture of horror, sadness, and anger. I am deeply sorry for the pain I caused to Aba, to Muna, to all of you, Jabari continued, his voice choked with emotion. I beg for forgiveness, even though I know I may not deserve it. His sorrowful and ashamed expression was clear on his face, capturing the depth of his remorse. The judgment. Then, the village elder, still with his stern and authoritative voice, proclaimed, "For the cruel actions you have committed, which have deeply affected our community, this will forever be a stain that cannot be washed away. Even if you are cleansed of your sins, the truth remains that you are a ruthless murderer, driven by your selfish desires." He continued, looking at Jabari with a piercing gaze. "The dark truth has been revealed. Your apology and plea for forgiveness have been spoken, but justice must be served to bring peace to Aba's tormented and anguished soul." Jabari, his eyes filled with pain, guilt, and anxiety, awaited his fate, the atmosphere growing unnervingly silent. The villagers watched, their hearts heavy and seething with the painful reality they were facing, awaiting the elder's decision. "In this world, every action has consequences, Jabari. You will never escape the responsibility of your wrongdoing," the elder declared, his gaze unwavering toward the trembling Jabari. "Jabari, you will be exiled to the land of Trani, a distant and desolate place, uninhabited, where ferocious beasts roam. You will never be allowed to return to this village. This is the consequence you must accept for the cruelty you inflicted upon Aba," the elder declared with resolute authority. Jabari, with eyes widened in bewilderment and fear upon hearing the verdict, realized the weight of his punishment. "This sentence, it is more severe than death itself. Your conscience will forever remind you of your wrongdoing, haunting you for the rest of your life," the elder continued solemnly. Overwhelmed, tears began streaming down Jabari's face as he collapsed, fully realizing the consequences of his actions. Murmurs filled the crowd, mingling with a sense of pity for Aba and anger toward Jabari. All the villagers felt a mix of emotions, but they ultimately agreed with the elder and the council's judgment, believing it was a fitting punishment for the cruelty Jabari had inflicted upon Aba. The village elder, with a stern gaze and a commanding voice, declared, "This judgment shall also serve as a lesson for everyone, a lesson about love and loyalty, a lesson about the consequences of selfish desires and cruel actions." The villagers nodded, fully understanding the weight and significance in every word of the elder's proclamation. After the village elder's judgment, in the solemn atmosphere, the villagers began to disperse, whispering among themselves about the events of that day. The following morning, Jabari was escorted to the land of his exile, facing a harsh and challenging journey ahead. He would have to confront the severe trials of survival in an uninhabited land where ferocious beasts roamed. That was the price Jabari had to pay for his betrayal and the cruel deeds he had committed, living in solitude, haunted by regret, remorse, and the torment of his conscience for the rest of his life. This sentence of the soul was even more ruthless than death itself. The story of Jabari and Aba, filled with sorrow and regret, became a cautionary tale told with stern voices by the elders, turning into an important lesson for the younger generation. It served as a powerful reminder of the true nature of love, trust, and loyalty, teaching the youth about the profound consequences of wrongful and cruel actions done to fulfill selfish desires or betray those who love us. The story also imparted the lesson that no matter how deeply wrongdoings are hidden, there will always come a day when they are brought to light. Always remember, the most beautiful thing is a genuine and faithful love, and the most peaceful path is one of kindness and a sincere, honest heart.